You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 419 of the podcast. And in this one, I got on Saraa D. Saraa has kindly agreed to share her OCD story with us. She is also a licensed clinical social worker working out of Soul Spa Psychotherapy and is an OCD and Trauma specialist. So in this, I chat with Saraa about her story, traumatic experiences in her childhood, her obsessions and compulsions, not getting a diagnosis, her therapy journey, and much more. Really enjoyed chatting to Saraa and hearing her story, and I think you guys will enjoy it too. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. So thank you to Saraa for her time, and of course thank you to you guys as always for listening. It means a lot. Without further ado, here she is. Welcome to the show, Saraa.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. And you are a therapist, obviously, but you're also someone who has experienced OCD. So it would be great to hear your story.
Absolutely. Well, I guess if we start young, then as a little kid, as often happens, like there were some traumatic experiences, and that matters because, as I grew up and tried to cope with these things. Obviously, OCD was present, but no one saw it. No one saw the OCD. There were also other things going on in terms of I had anxiety and things like that, but also that's something that no one saw. After the traumatic experiences as a kid, I was born in the 80s. I think most people still didn't believe in therapy. So it was kind of like, okay, we'll just go to school the next day. You'll be fine, When I look back, lots of things were happening. I had habits of tapping my fingers. They all had to be equal. I would cut my food up into little pieces, and I couldn't have a bite of food until I finished a math problem. Otherwise, it would be wrong. A lot of just right OCD symptoms. And if I touch one part of the gate, I remember at school spending the entire day touching the entire gate all around my elementary school because I had touched one part of it, and I couldn't stop until I touched the entire thing. When I was younger, I think they were referred to as, I guess, just kind of being weird, or you have these habits, But again, there's no framework around this is something you're struggling with or you need help with. It was kind of just like, stop, When I got older, it continued to be pretty problematic. Like one of the hardest things was that I had this thing I had to say to my dad every night. We had this routine. Good night. I love you. I'll see you in the morning. Every single night. It's a really beautiful routine. And after those kind of traumatic experiences I mentioned, my mother had to leave the home. So my mother left when I was 9, which is a huge loss for kids. But again, being born in the 80s, people said, just go to school the next day, you'll be okay. So this phrase, this ritual between my dad and us kids, good night, a kiss, I love you, a hug, see you in the morning, became this thing that I had to say every single night, or he would die or I would die. And that went on for years. I remember one night kind of realizing, I didn't have the language for it, but realizing I was kind of trapped, realizing that I understood that this was more than just good night, I love you, see you in the morning. That this idea that he would die if I didn't say this, this is like high school. And I'm like, this is too much to bear. This is too big. And so I'm going to try not to say it, So I went to bed that night. I said goodnight. I gave him a kiss. I laid down, and then I just stressed for hours and hours and hours about him possibly dying in the morning. And so I remember about like I don't know, midnight or when I just yelled out, I love you, see you in the morning, like the rest of the sentence. And my poor dad, he's like got to go to work the next morning. He goes, what? I go, good night. I love you. I'll see you in the morning. And he goes, okay, good night. I love you. I'll see you in the morning. He had no idea what this was about. But I finally had relief and I could sleep. I tried a few more times, and I remember finally the night that I was able to resist saying the whole thing. And I was just sweating and a mess overnight until the morning came and we were both alive. And I said, I will never, ever, ever say that again. Never. Which is another trap, right? I can't say good night, I love you, see you in the morning. So I just at least was able to get out of that one. Um, in college, I remember, so these are like some of the big ones. And I remember I couldn't leave my dorm room unless the right song was on. I would be 30 minutes late to classes. Like I lost letters of recommendation over this, you know? So I'm sitting there, the song is playing. It had to be like the right song that made me feel the right way. So it needed to be the right song. And I also needed to leave right at the end. If the next song started, I was stuck. So I had to wait another 3 minutes. So I had to figure out how to time it so I could get my backpack and run out of the room and before the next one started. Otherwise I'd be trapped again and again and again, you know? And very similarly, I remember kind of um, getting fed up at some point and going, I should be able to leave my room, you know? And it took a long time, but eventually kind of walking out, even though I don't think it's time because I have to get to class, and that beginning to sort of break that one down, but it didn't really completely go away, you know? When I gave birth to my daughter, I was a child welfare social worker, and we deal with some pretty heavy content. And I know myself. I didn't have language for it. I didn't know it was OCD. I didn't know. I mean, for the most part, I sort of thought that these things kind of were my responsibility to handle and navigate. There was still like this shame, this blame, like this is kind of my fault in a way. We'll talk about that more later. But I had all of these really intense thoughts about children being hurt. And I was already kind of having them, but I knew I had to just, let them be there and do my work because it was really important. But once I gave birth to my daughter, it was like so bad. And I would just sit there holding her little tiny precious self, just holding her and having all of these intrusive thoughts about something happening to her or something happening or children around the world being born. Like, right now a child is being born and probably they're being trafficked. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And I knew enough about, again, didn't know it was OCD, but I knew enough about myself and my own brain that this kind of thing happened. And I just needed to let it be there. And so I kind of developed this practice of saying, yeah, that's true. That's true. And just crying and crying and crying, and really just holding her and being as gentle and loving with her as I possibly could, like kind of in a way on behalf of those children, I didn't know that this is something I could get help for, basically, like I said, having a difficult childhood and having your mother leave, of course, that's incredibly traumatic. There's other things going on as well. It's not just OCD, but this part of it, if I had known this is something that I could name and specifically work on, I would have done that. There's no way I would have just suffered through having to do all these particular specific things. There's times I almost choked when I was younger because I had to swallow food just right. I had to feel the sensation just right. And by the time it got to the back, it would be like panic, because it didn't feel right. And I'd have to try to get it back out, So I studied psychology in undergraduate. And then I became a MSW at UCLA for graduate school. And I was able to go through all of my education, be a social worker for 5 years, clinical social worker for 5 years, then get all of my hours, get licensed, become a licensed therapist, and still not be able to see this, for what it is. And it really highlights just how, and of course, education can't do every single thing, that's why there are specialties, but just how little general information they give us, It happened to be the case that about 2 years into licensure, an organization reached out. They were recruiting therapists, and they said, "Hey, do you want to learn to treat OCD?" And I thought, sure, why not? The only representation I had of OCD was that show Monk, here in the US is a really popular show. I don't know if it's
Yeah, we do. We had
expressed.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a show called Monk. And I didn't really, I knew about it. It was really popular. It never occurred to me that that was me at all. Cause the popular representation of OCD, of course, is like the cleanliness, this external, he's also a white man, like this idea that like, that's a legitimate problem. You just are a mess, this isn't something that, uh, just this idea, like again, this idea that there's something going on with me that even should or could be named, So when I thought, oh yeah, I'll learn about OCD and I'll learn to treat that, that's cool. And I'm sitting in the trainings, and the more I'm learning, I'm just getting flushed with this like hot shame, this embarrassment, because I know, oh my God, I know exactly what this is. I know exactly how this works. It's
Mm.
this, right? And then this, and then that's, I'm like, raising my hand, taking to it like water. And I'm like, I'm like, I'm a fraud. Like, I'm not actually learning this as a therapist. I've lived this and I'm letting that guide me. But like, did I live it? I was never diagnosed. No
Mm.
one ever examined me. And then, over time, I eventually learned other therapists who were open about their OCD and out and talking about it. But then that still didn't feel right to me at that time either, because I didn't have the privilege of having had therapeutic intervention. No therapist ever came and validated my suffering. And so therefore, is it even real? You know?
Mm.
The research is pretty clear that, of course, we know that I'm going to say ethnic minorities for political and like research purposes, like because there's like smaller numbers, but that here in the US, I'll speak about like what I know, people of color have less access to resources, typically because of like systemic oppression, like not people not being intentional about developing resources for communities of color. So for me as an African American person, like I said, I got through a lot of really difficult childhood experiences, and not a single teacher, parent, doctor, no one ever said, hey, how about therapy for this kid? There weren't, it costs a lot of money. We had like, basic health insurance through my dad, but like there was no like complex, and here's like in case you need out of pocket therapy, like there's just no systems for that. um and so there's the shame of, first of all, having suffered it to begin with, and then additionally the shame, I think, of of not having that ever be validated and not getting proper help for it. And so because I didn't sit down and have ERP with a therapist, does that mean that should I not be a therapist? Like this shame that if I
Yeah.
am open about that, then like what does that say about me?
Yeah.
Obviously I've moved through that because I'm here
I
talking
was
to
gonna
you about
say, yeah. Oh, this is an
it.
exposure. Yeah.
Exactly. That's literally it. Like what
Mm.
I say to my clients is like, think of ERP kind of as a way of life, you know?
Mm.
And it's hard to really know what is an OCD thought and what is, I guess, just regular anxiety, and like sometimes clients get really interested in trying to figure out, is this OCD or is it not? Because if it's not OCD, I don't have to do the exposure. And I just go, you know what? Exposure therapy is good for anxiety in general. So like, whether regardless of where the big feeling is coming from, if we just kind of make it a way of life to sit with it and
Mm.
accept all of the big feelings, the shame, the whatever it is, then to me, that's the highest form of self-love, like giving yourself that validation that you're having a hard time in this moment, whether
Mm.
I, as the therapist, say that's OCD or it's not or whatever. Just the point is, I'm feeling big feelings. So let me feel them and make friends with them. And then overall, we know that whether it's OCD or anything else, it's likely to reduce my symptoms in the long run.
Mm.
So this is an exposure.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Before I ask any questions, is there anything else you wanted to say on your story or share?
um, well, to be honest, I'll say that I sat down before we met and I wrote down all of the OCD symptoms that I can remember. And then at the end, I realized, who am I trying to prove this to? you know, like
Mm.
this, like again, this shame and fear around, like if I don't bring the receipts, then again, it didn't really happen, right? So then I did want to share that. You know, I know that for
Yeah.
many people, there is whatever the barriers are to mental health treatment. One of them is like, is someone going to believe me? You know,
Yeah.
and so I feel like I'm right here, kind of like living through that. Like, am I going to be believed? And for anybody listening, it's my job to believe you. It's my
Yeah.
job to figure it out. With
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it.
Yeah, thank you. And a really good point. I mean, and there's going to be people listening that are in countries where there is maybe it's really hard to get a therapist, an OCD therapist, really expensive, or there just aren't any specialists in their country. Obviously, in the UK or USA, diversity issues that come up that stop access to treatment. Um, yeah, you name it. There's a million and one reasons why people might not. So hearing you say that, I guess what I'm saying is a lot, all those people listening have read OCD stuff, listened to the podcast, and are like almost convinced this is what I've been struggling with my whole life. And they find answers maybe in this show or elsewhere, and maybe never get a diagnosis
Mm-hmm.
because it's not possible. So it's good to
Mm-hmm.
validate those people because otherwise they live with that imposter syndrome or I'm not valid until I get that green stamp.
Absolutely.
Mm,
Absolutely. Um, and it was when I was doing the research on this, like deciding to move through my own shame and feelings of like being stigmatized and things like that.
mm,
Um, when I was reading it, I realized like, wait a minute, most people aren't diagnosed. Like, what? That doesn't make sense. Like this idea that only those who have been through the system and been identified and diagnosed and treated, only they have the privilege of having their suffering acknowledged and they can talk about it. The vast majority of humans are not going to be diagnosed. So that was a part of my aha moment in people need to hear this story that you can go through your entire childhood, teenage years, adulthood, get into all sorts of stuff, suffer so much. And just because someone from the institutions doesn't come and say, yes, this is exactly real, that does not diminish anything that you're going through. And in my case, once I became an ERP therapist, I was having a ball. Like, oh my gosh, like what about this thing? What about this thing where I won't say this thing in the mirror? And what about that? And what about that? Like I was just doing
mm,
ERP on myself on this like wide variety of things and just getting free. So if
mhm,
like you mentioned, reading these things and listening to the podcast and you're doing ERP and it's helping you have a ball. I know that it's not a ball. It's very
I know what
difficult.
you mean. Yeah.
It's very painful. But like I said, after living with this and spending the last like almost 5 years treating OCD and moving my clients through this, the joy you get on the other side of not having a sensation control you
Mhm,
is amazing. It's amazing to not be trapped in all of these things. So eventually, like I talked about a moment ago, for me, the goal is to make friends with these really difficult sensations as a form of
mm,
self-love. And I think in my case, when I think about like myself as an African American person, being a part of a group that's not intentionally well served by these systems that arguably aren't well serving anybody. Um,
yeah.
but it's also a form of activism, right? I get to have this relief. I get to validate my suffering. I get to find helpful things, find these fancy interventions, and use them to make my life easier. You get to do that.
Mm, true. True. Yeah, good way of looking at it. And I think you've answered my next question, but I'll ask anyway, because I was going to ask, you didn't see a therapist specifically for OCD. So how did you sort of get better from it? But you kind of answered that when you learned ERP, you were using it on yourself. Is that, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I went to therapists kind of off and on. I think the first one was in college. I had a bad breakup and I said, I have to leave school. Where was I gonna go? Like whatever. But that was just my
Mm,
18-year-old brain. And I love the dean of students. She was like, no, you're not. You're not going anywhere. You're gonna stay here. You're not disenrolling and you're gonna go to therapy. And I was like, wait, I can go to therapy? Like I wanted to study psychology, but for some reason,
mhm,
this disconnect between what I could get and this theoretical concept of psychology, it just wasn't there. So I was like, oh my gosh, like, and I also didn't know they offered free therapy. It was like a limited number of
mhm,
sessions, but I was like, yes, I will go. And we were dealing with other things at the time. So this idea of like, I think that if I see naked Jesus in my brain, I'm going to go to hell. And it keeps popping up and I keep trying to stop. Like that just didn't come up, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and, later on down the line, when I was able to afford my own therapy, and the first one I got into, this is like just before graduate school. I will say that I don't think it was this individual therapist. I think that just the way that therapy is set up, there's this hope of trying to CBT everything.
Mm-hmm.
And if she could just get me to see that I come from a really poor neighborhood, like, yes, there's a lot of like discrimination and things, but that I was able to get through college and I'm getting a master's degree soon and just education, just focus on what's to come. And she may have just been intentional about deciding that her role was to just get me to the next step. And then we could fall apart and do all the trauma, difficult work, But my experience of it was like every time I try to take my like big old bag of like difficult traumatic stuff, including the OCD thoughts, right? I'm sure I'm going to hell, or I'm sure that I'm going to make my dad die, or I'm going to die, all kinds of stuff. Every time I sort of tried to open that up, it was like, okay, now we're going to close that. And instead we're going to think positive thoughts. We're going to identify those ants, those automatic negative thoughts. Those ants are marching everywhere. And I'm like, okay, the ants are marching, but I still feel terrible. And I could get good at identifying the cognitive distortions, but I still felt terrible and I had no resources to navigate these emotions, So to be honest, it was just a lot of self-study, a lot of bumping my head against the wall too, like a lot of trial and error, of trying different therapists, reading different books, trying to figure out what's going on with me. Like I couldn't, in a way, I guess, I sort of had to become a part of my own therapeutic team, and it's sort of unfair that I had to study psychology in graduate school in order to be a member of my own team to then, me and Audible are best friends. I have listened to every single book on trauma, therapy, complex PTSD, all of these things. And so I was sort of like working my way into this place anyway of that these big, difficult emotions were sort of a part of me and needed to be accepted anyway. And so when I learned the ERP, I was sort of already there and was moving through things. And that was like here it is. Like you've got the rest of it right here, And it's also why I have the perspective that the emotions are a part of us and that they need to be felt and integrated, and even sometimes depending on, how people, everybody has their own kind of worldview. But for some of my clients, we really get into the idea that these emotions, if you think about them like your inner child, most people who have OCD develop it in childhood. So in many ways, it's a way of coping with really difficult emotions in childhood that just overwhelmed your coping skills, And so OCD comes in and says, don't worry, I'll make sure. In my case, OCD came in and said, okay, your mother left. Oh man, that's hard. But don't worry, I'll make sure your father doesn't leave. As long as you say this magic word every single night, he'll be here forever, And that's really nice of that part of my brain to try to help me. It was a trap. It wasn't actually helping, but I get that it was trying to help. So I can have empathy and compassion and see those emotions as something that I was struggling with when I was a kid. I can hold it. It feels terrible. It feels terrible. But when you kind of get over that hump, you're sitting with it, you let your SED score kind of come down and rest, and you do it enough times, eventually, you come to have more empathy and be accepting and loving toward that emotion. I'll also say that having a little one myself, kids aren't sweet and nice all the time. Like they're a nightmare. They can be. It's like I was like singing or dancing. Like art is a way of how like I help to manage myself, and it's fun and it makes me happy. I dance and I do art. And so I was out with my daughter and I was just we were at a show, like it was like Hot Chocolate Nutcracker, Debbie Allen's. It's amazing. So we're watching the show, and at the end, this song by Mariah Carey is playing, and I'm just like dancing and singing it. And she like pushes me and she goes, "Stop dancing." Oh my God, let me have joy, but that's also how she deals with, I guess, her embarrassment that her mother is like dancing and no one else is. But no, kids are a little mean, So
but they're so unfiltered, aren't they? They're they're great, but they're
Yeah. And so if your emotions are being mean to you also, like that's sort of a part of things, like, you got to accept this as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. If adults did what toddlers did, they would be called abusers, you know?
They would be in jail. We would just put them, just put
Exactly.
them away.
But they're cute, so it kind of balances out. But
Exactly. The oxytocin takes over, right? It's like, okay.
exactly. So yeah, I like what you said about you when you figured out, yeah, it's just your brain trying to help, trying to protect you. It was not helping, but it was your brain doing its best to help in a really tough situation. And then,
Absolutely.
yeah, what you said about CBT there, about that CBT or the therapist you saw that was doing CBT and was like, no, let's shut that down. Let's just stay to the positive. I mean, that's when CBT is manualized and done by the book. I don't like it because it's missing that. And most good CBT therapists won't do this. They will bring in the
Yeah.
human element. So I just want to caveat that. But when it's done like that, that's when CBT is bad, in my opinion, because you need someone to sit with you in that dark place, empathize, validate, explore it, work on it, process it so you can move on or make sense of it and then do the other stuff.
I think the nuance that you said there is till you're ready to move on, you, the client, and I think that I'm sure I've also done this as a therapist, and I also train or help to train. I'm an associate supervisor, so I help to train new ERP therapists.
Cool.
And the therapist also has to have a capacity to sit in discomfort for as long as it takes. And we often don't. Who's going to train you to do that? Who's monitoring that? So you can become a licensed therapist and not yourself have the capacity to sit with someone in their difficult, dark places. I don't know, for maybe 6 months if they need it. Yeah. So I found that there is this, sitting with it, but also this parental energy saying, okay, now it's time to move on. And I think that we as therapists, even if you're not going to like primarily treat OCD, it is good to spend time learning how to do it and learning how to do ERP, because it gives you this entirely different skill set of just sitting with someone in difficult times and not like grabbing a tissue, trying to fix them, trying to clean it up, or, but let's look on the bright side. I have to look for those signs and remind the therapist, we're not doing that because these feelings, again, are part of this person and have a right to be here. They have a right to be here.
Yeah.
So really not intervening and letting the person's emotional nervous system, sort of learn to navigate it without us trying to help and intervene. And so I think that's something. Also, CBT, like I said, insurance companies like it because it can be kind of, you can measure it, it's skill building, skill training. And within that, like if we're going to sit in that for 9 months, I could see being like, okay, wrap it up. Like the insurance companies are like, come on, what are we doing here? So not that everything functions like that, but I just happen to experience that,
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So look, 2 very quick questions because I know we're at the end of our time. Just words of hope for anyone listening.
Words of hope.
Yeah.
I think that what I've said a few times here, it's very intentional. If you are struggling with feelings that feel like that they're just the end of everything, the end all be all, your OCD is telling you, well, like now you're a bad person because you did this thing. These feelings really are just bodily sensations. They are just feelings, and they don't have the power to materialize and become physical and come and get you, right? Feelings are just that. They're feelings, and they're a part of you, and you don't need to be afraid of your own emotions. So once I realized that, that's like one of the most hopeful things. And I view that as like kind of a superpower. If all of us in the world could sit with our difficult feelings and not do the compulsion or do the thing that they think will make the feeling go away, we'd have a much more peaceful world, So I think that learning to accept your own feelings as a part of you is a superpower. And if you're listening now, then this is something that you're well on your way to. You're learning what you need to learn to get to that place of willingness to feel the sensations in your own body. You know?
Yeah, great. Nice. So lastly, you got a billboard. What do you want written on that billboard?
I have a billboard? If I had a billboard. I would say, now this is a little triggering. Let me sit with it and say the imperfect thing, not the perfect thing, you know? But I think it would say like, be here now. Be here now, right? And this idea that there's really, when we're talking about being in your own body, changing your perspective that there is nothing to escape, you know? That instead we're just going to be here now and be in acceptance of what is internally, you know? I don't know. I think that, and like once we hang up, I'll think of 17 other things I could have said, but you know what? This is an exposure and it is okay.
And that's what came up in the here and now, right? So
exactly.
That was meant to be. So look, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else you wish you could have said or shared today?
Again, probably it'll come up later, but I'll say that I will be doing much more of this. I look forward to making myself available, to writing more, and really writing from this perspective of people who have been sort of outside of the system and being able to say, this is how you can navigate for yourself, how you can help yourself, you know? So I just look forward to being a part of this broader movement of people doing the work of helping people get better, even if they're not strictly, rigidly, you know, in the therapeutic setting. We can all access that. So have hope. Have hope.
Yeah, brilliant. I like it. Well, thanks again for your story. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It was great meeting you.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us with a one-time tip/donation, please go to theocdstories.com/support. All tips, no matter how large or small, are greatly appreciated. Please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. If you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/theOCD stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.